So there is, by definition, and I have other liver biopsy studies. I have studies from Africa in the 1950s showing 50% of the people there had vitamin A toxicity in their liver. 50%. So this is a real problem, and people they don't know about it. And then they're even doing things like for their health, they think, where they're eating more of these foods and they're building it up even faster. So
Awe Genge, this is Mental Mythos, hosted by Accutane.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Mental Mythos. I'm your host, Accutane, and before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
Also, I just want to say thank you so much for responding to my message of Fortmesh and being able to have this conversation with me. And something that I realized is the fact that at first I didn't realize how much it is important when it comes to nutrition and how it actually impacts your mental well-being and mental health in general. So through our conversation, it's something that I feel like, in a way, I'm quite fascinated in terms of your title, the nutrition detective. It's something that actually grabbed my attention in a way, and probably through our conversation, we'll be able to have a conversation that will not only benefit me alone, but also the audience that will be listening to this particular episode. So, Dr. Smith, I would like to welcome you to Mental Mythos, and thank you so much for being here.
thanks for having me.
And reading you through your story, and I saw that you were quite interested in nutrition at the age of 11, and that's quite fascinating in terms of that, in being that young and being able to be interested in nutrition. Can you take us through that? What actually piqued your interest in terms of being so interested in nutrition?
Well, at first it started with exercise. It was actually, I started working out with some dumbbells at 11, and my dad got me a bodybuilding book. And so I was really interested in the bodybuilding stuff and all that. And once you get into weight training and all that, then nutrition comes around. And then we start working on other things. And I actually had, as a kid, I got into supplements early, and I was trying to figure, I had these really bad migraine. They were very short, very intense, like migraine-ish type headaches. And I couldn't figure out what they were. And I went to my family, we took a trip to Canada, and there was a supplement store there, and they sold a magazine, a free magazine out front. And I looked in it, and they talked about NutraSweet or aspartame. And the title of it was Toxic Sweetener. And I read the article, and it's talked in there about headaches from it. And I went, wait, I'm using Equal, like NutraSweet, on my cereal. I'm making I made like fake sodas out of it with like soda water and some Equal and some lemon juice. I was making like homemade sodas and stuff. I thought I was being all healthy. And they talked about headaches, and I took it out of my diet after that, and immediately the headaches just went away. So there was that, and then there was the time when I was a kid, when I was about halfway drinking a glass of milk, and I realized that it was giving me a ton of phlegm. And I was about halfway through the glass of milk, and I'd feel the phlegm starting in my throat and in my sinuses, and I went, this is weird. Like this is not cool, because allergies were a big thing in my family. A lot of us had seasonal allergies and all that stuff, and I went, this is not a good sign. I could reduce this. So I think I kind of got off milk several years after that. And so it was noticing that things I put in my body changed how I felt. That was the big thing.
Actually, in a way, it laid a path to what you are today in terms of being a nutrition detective. And it's quite an fascinating thing. And also, through the conversation that we are about to embark on, also, I like to mention that I would like to actually dive more into also vitamin A toxicity and detoxification, and also the toxic bio theory. So I'm quite interested in that. And for someone that isn't aware of this conversation, on also as much as I try to actually research on it, as much as the information online can get you so far, but from yourself, a professional on this field, what is a vitamin A toxicity?
Well, what is it? Okay, so what we call vitamin A, it was how we can kind of start with this funny little joke about it. Well, when is the time when we're learning something or when we're figuring something out, when do we make the biggest mistakes? When we first start learning about it, right? When we're first figuring it out, that's when we make the biggest mistakes. And that vitamin A was named A because it was the very first vitamin. So it's vitamin A is an alcohol. Retinol is an alcohol. It breaks down into an aldehyde and it breaks down into an acid. So there's retinol, there's retinaldehyde, and there's retinoic acid. Nobody tends to think of alcohols and aldehydes as being good for us. And the acid form, the retinoic acid, is said to be the part that we need as the active form of vitamin A. That's what we supposedly need. That's what the essential thing is. It's not retinol. It's the retinoic acid that is made from it. Well, since we're here talking about mental health and these other topics, I mean, there's black box warnings, as in the strongest warning a pharmaceutical company can give about isotretinoin, which is Accutane, and suicide risk. So if we have a compound, and so the thing that's important for people to understand is they'll be like, oh no, well, that's a pharmaceutical. No, Accutane, also known as 13-cis-retinoic acid, is the exact same compound, 13-cis-retinoic acid, that your body turns some of the vitamin A you eat into. So if you're eating vitamin A, you are essentially making Accutane in your body a drug that carries a suicide risk warning. So we start to get into there. Then lots of people have talked about depression and anxiety and all these things with Accutane. Those are like the beginnings of where it could lead, right? There's always warning signs. These things you don't just have suicide behaviors or suicide thoughts just come out of nowhere. There's usually depression that starts and anxiety and all these things that lead up to it. So vitamin A toxicity here's the hard thing for a lot of people to understand. You, me, everybody, we were handed down the toxicities and deficiencies from generations beforehand. We do not, the idea of any of us starting with a clean slate of any sort is absolute nonsense. We inherited toxicities from our mother, and whatever DNA damage potentially came from our father and his sperm. So we inherit these things, and then they can build up. And then the same thing with deficiencies. If your parents didn't have enough of a certain nutrient, especially your mother during the time she carried you, she can't give you that. You're not starting with it. And then the very same diet that your family eats that might have caused them to become toxic or deficient, you learned how to eat like that. So not only are you inheriting these problems from generations before, but the things that we learned from our parents compound them and continue them going. So it's kind of like nature and nurture. It's both. And so then we see these problems like vitamin A toxicity, as vitamin A has become kind of more of a health foodie type thing. And it's always been known that fat-soluble vitamins, so the fat-soluble vitamins are vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K, or ADEC, as I remember them as. Anyway, these are the ones that can accumulate and cause problems. This is what everybody knows. They're the easiest ones to accumulate. Other B vitamins can accumulate. B6 toxicity, go look that one up. B6 can accumulate in your nerves and cause neuropathy. It's also an alcohol and an aldehyde. So these things that can get stored can then over time, so somebody might think I'm not doing a lot of it every day. The problem is if you're doing more than you can get rid of, if you're taking in more than you're clearing out, you're accumulating it, you're building it up. And if you build up enough of it, you'll have problems. There was a paper done, I think it was I don't remember, maybe 2020, where they did biopsies, or they did necropsies of livers. So they looked at the liver tissue after people had died. They analyzed it. And of the 27 people they looked at, US people, 9 of them had diagnosable vitamin A toxicity. So that's a third. That's 33% of the cadavers, the dead people that they looked at in their liver. A full third of them had diagnosable vitamin A toxicity. That's an epidemic level, but the WHO said that an epidemic level of something is 20% or higher. So there is, by definition, and I have other liver biopsy studies. I have studies from Africa in the 1950s showing 50% of the people there had vitamin A toxicity in their liver. 50%. So this is a real problem, and people they don't know about it. And then they're even doing things like, for their health, they think, where they're eating more of these foods and they're building it up even faster. So it can happen from supplements. People try to say it only happens from supplements. It can absolutely happen from food. I've got that documented everywhere. We've got a bunch of people. Really, where we're at with this is I decided to go into this after reading the work of Grant Genereux and Anthony Mawson, and I incorporated this into my practice. And as I've avoided, or I should say, the words I use are reduced, minimized, avoided. Like sometimes you can't avoid something, you can just minimize it or reduce it, because vitamin A is in many foods. It's a plant defense toxin. It's not a vitamin. It's not good for us. It's for the plants to defend themselves. So as we try to reduce our intake, we try to minimize our intake, and if we can avoid it, like avoiding taking supplements with vitamin A in it, then we avoid it. And what we see in myself and others is people are healing what they thought were incurable conditions. So I even tell people say, well, how do you know how toxic I am? Because the blood test for vitamin A does not necessarily show what's in the liver. You can have somebody with, there's case studies of this. People had very low vitamin A. They had deficiency of vitamin A technically in their blood, and their liver was absolutely overflowing with vitamin A. Absolutely overflowing. So the blood test doesn't tell us. The blood test could look exactly wrong. So what we do is we just assume people have this problem living in the modern world, and if they reduce their toxin intake, their body does detox it, and then they slowly get better over time. And this is what we see. Of course, people out there doing it on their own. People can make mistakes doing all sorts of things. People can screw up all sorts of things. But yeah, the general gist of it that we do is a very simple diet, and we like to see people get better from it, and that's what we're seeing. So
you just came up with the information that I didn't know before, in a way, because I'm thinking in terms of how people are not aware of vitamin A toxicity, and something also I have said that I don't know it because I believe that there is rise of vitamins when it comes to supplements. People are how can I put this? People are so obsessed about vitamins, and at some point that one can come across vitamin A toxicity and not realize that it's bad for their health. And in terms of just to be in terms of just want to find out that we are still on the same page. What is vitamin? Where does vitamin come from? I understand that you mentioned that it can come from generation through your past, your parents, through your parents, your ancestors. So in terms of, let's say, my grandparents